Every day on my way home, I walk past Gheluvelt Park on the northern outskirts of Worcester. I always knew that it had a connection to the First World War, but never looked into it further. In fact, this park holds a story that I believe should be understood more deeply by the people of this county. A story of how just a few hundred men of the 2nd Division of the Worcestershire Regiment would permanently alter the course of the First World War.
It is late October 1914, and the First Battle of Ypres is well underway. Kaiser Wilhelm has made it the priority of the German Fourth Army to seize the crucial strategic town of Ypres in order to move on the vital channel ports which the Entente forces are using to draw supplies and men from Great Britain. Achieving this would surely force a surrender, with the road to Paris lying open and the helping hand of Great Britain heavily constricted. It is at this early stage in the First World War, where large-scale entrenchment has not yet been seen, and numerous open battles have been held in the area in the well-known Race to the Sea. Ypres was a small yet heavily strategic Belgian town located near vital routes and roads leading to channel ports at Dunkirk, Calais and Boulogne-sur-Mer. By 1914, it had acquired very concrete strategic and emotional value to its British, Indian, French and Belgian defenders. The position of Ypres had already formed a salient, or bulge, into German lines, and was surrounded on all sides by high ground, which was quickly utilised by German artillery. As this first Battle of Ypres raged on, one small village lying along the Menin road would very quickly inherit a serious strategic value, and the events that would unfold there in the following hours would forever define the course of the First World War.
One. The British and French defensive situation in Flanders was now extremely dire. Having been on the back foot in the area since mid-October, the German numerical advantage, the superior German offensives and counter-offensives, and the volume of German artillery support had pushed the defenders to the breaking point. Such was the confidence that the line would be broken in the early days of November that Kaiser Wilhelm himself was personally present behind the line at Courtrai, waiting to ride the victory parade through the gates of Ypres and deliver the landslide German victory which he had promised his people.
Lying in the path of the German forces, along the infamous Menin road which overlooked Ypres and ran from the high ground all the way down into it, was the small village of Gheluvelt. With successful German attacks either side of the Menin road, taking this village overlooking Ypres was set to be the last piece of the puzzle for the Germans in advancing further. In the early hours of the 31st of October 1914, 17th and 15th Army Corps, alongside 2nd Corps of Army Group of Farbeck, positioned themselves to strike on the weary British defenders. Defending the town, outnumbered 4 times over, were 5 British battalions, numbering around just 1,000 men. With the Germans having built up an impossible attacking momentum, it was imperative that this momentum be ground down and snuffed out if the Entente were to have any hope of restoring the situation. The responsibility had fallen to the 1st Scots Guards, 1st South Wales Borderers, 2nd Royal Welsh Fusiliers, 1st Queen's Regiment, 2nd King's Royal Rifle Corps, 1st Loyal North Lancashires, and 2nd Royal Scots Fusiliers. As British official historian Sir James Edmonds put it in the Official History, the troops must be imagined as fighting in small groups, scattered along the front in shallow trenches, often separated by gaps of up to 400 yards. Many an officer fell in attempting to get from one group to another. All along the line surrounding Gheluvelt in the early morning of the 31st of October 1914, trenches were being abandoned and then retaken due to infrequent British artillery support, as well as the constant threat of German shell strikes and advances towards the village. Whilst for a moment it seemed that the breakthrough was occurring, British artillery support eventually eased the situation until the enemy regrouped yet again east and southeast of the village. At 12:30 p.m., the German forces launched a larger attack against the 1st Division, having increased their artillery support. According to Sir French's despatch, the large attack just to the southeast of Gheluvelt then broke the 1st Division lines, with the 2nd Battalion Welsh Regiment being routed from their trenches. With a large gap now open in the line, units of the 7th Division were quickly surrounded via their exposed left flank, having been weakened by persistent and concentrated artillery strikes on their positions to the south of the town. The 2nd King's Royal Rifle Corps, as well as the 2nd Royal Scots Fusiliers, having been completely seized by the enemy, fought to the very last man, and all other battalions in the area were reduced to just handfuls of men. The only battalion remaining in the town were the 1st South Wales Borderers, who were holding their position bravely in and around the badly damaged Gheluvelt Chateau. Understanding the desperate nature of the situation, 1st and 2nd Division headquarters, stationed at Hooge Chateau further up the Menin Road, which had played a vital role in organising the British defensive actions as well as conferring with the defending French forces led by General Foch, had created a contingency plan for Major Hankey's 2nd Worcester Division to be available for a counterattack on Gheluvelt in the event that it was taken. The 2nd Worcesters, a battle-worn and highly experienced unit, had been waiting to be called upon near Polygon Wood since the 24th of October. Despite having been sent here to rest after what had proven to be a long and bitter autumn campaign, merely an hour after arriving to the area they were called to push through the woods and into the front line for a day's fighting amidst reports of German infantry pouring into the tree line. Heading straight out into the full focus of enemy firepower on the other side, they dug in for 2 days, before being relieved by overlapping troops who were soon to launch a catastrophic attack on Vercellier.
Much like the battalions around them, the Worcesters were part of the last remnants of Britain's old contemptibles, a small yet fierce professional army, unlike the army of mass conscription that Britain would be forced to adopt later in the war. From the 27th onwards, they sat in Polygon Wood, waiting, in full earshot of the most forceful artillery barrage of the war thus far. All around them, Allied retreats, hammered battalions, a feeling of desperation and of an impending breaking point.
In an account believed to have been written by a Sergeant Frederick Sutton, an NCO of the 2nd Worcesters, it is written, "From the 27th to the 30th the battalion remained in reserve, or occupying supporting trenches, always shelled, always losing men. On the night of the 30th the battalion mustered 11 officers and about 450 men. Such was the prelude to Gheluvelt." At midday, word began to reach the division that Gheluvelt was overrun, and at 12:45 p.m. A Company was moved to a position northwest of Gheluvelt in order to fire upon any Germans attempting to advance up the road, and keep the enemy within the confines of Gheluvelt itself for as long as possible. The remaining 3 companies of men, B, C, and D Company, began to prepare for what they thought to be their inevitable retreat back to a makeshift line ever closer to Ypres, likely for a last stand against the relentless stream of German infantry. Captain B.C.S. Clark wrote in an account of these few hours, "Most of us knew not exactly what was happening, but there were some who did, and said little or nothing. It was best so. We got our orders, no need here to mention names or how they were received, but we got them, and we wondered if there was any hope of success. We had no doubts as to the morale of what was left of the battalion, for we knew the men would face anything with that same wonderful spirit that had been shown from the very beginning." As the men were going about their preparations, Major Hankey was ordered to the headquarters of a Brigadier General Fitzclarence V.C., about 300 yards away. Brigadier General Fitzclarence V.C. was somewhat of a legend to the men of the British Expeditionary Force. 49 years of age, he was a veteran of the Second Boer War and was considered to be the father of the trench raid. His fearlessness, cunning, and tactical unorthodoxy had earned him a Victoria Cross, as well as the name of the Demon amongst his men. Pulling Hankey aside, he briefed him on the situation, ordering him to immediately counterattack Gheluvelt and commit all 3 of the remaining companies to the task. Despite not necessarily being permitted to instruct Major Hankey, he did so anyway, pointing out to him the church spire of Gheluvelt in the distance, and ordering him to charge on the last position of the South Wales borderers before forcing his way into the town and repelling any German advances. Around this time, German artillery batteries received new instructions. At midday, a German reconnaissance aircraft flew over Hooge Chateau, just up the Menin Road. It is suspected that the pilot noticed the large gathering of motor cars outside the chateau. Concluding that this was being used as part of the British command structure, it was ordered to be shelled. Disastrously for the British, it was indeed being used as a command headquarters for both 1st and 2nd Division. The first shells fell on the grounds at 1:30 p.m., around the time when the Worcesters were launching their attack. With numerous commanding staff killed, wounded, or severely shell-shocked, including the 1st and 2nd Division divisional commanders, one, General Lomax, mortally wounded, and the other, General Munro, unconscious, the command structure in the area was critically damaged. If it had not reached this status already, the situation as it stood was one of the greatest military crises that the British Armed Forces had ever experienced, with the 2nd Worcesters the only unit in the area with the capability to act on the German advance. Concrete preparations for the attack were being made by 1:45 p.m, with wire cutters and scouts being sent to clear the path of obstacles for the 3 attacking companies. The men were issued extra ammunition and instructed to leave their packs behind, taking only what would be immediately useful to them on the field of battle. The order to fix bayonets was given at 2 p.m, and the battalion advanced orderly to a plain southeast of the woods, hidden from view of the Gheluvelt Chateau by the uphill Polderhoek Ridge. With enemy artillery still striking the peak of the ridge, Major Hankey emphasised the need to proceed swiftly. The companies advanced at double pace up the slope. The Worcesters advanced through the many dead and dying, as well as the retreating remnants of the 1st Division. The men recalled shouts of, "You can't go on, it's murder," "Don't go on," and "You fools, it's hell down there," from the tired and shell-shocked survivors. Approaching the peak of the ridge with an alarming lack of cover surrounding them, the line of bayonets was spotted by German artillery, who began to pepper the division with shell-burst artillery, detonating above the heads of the oncoming infantry and spreading shrapnel across them with devastating effect. With artillery ripping into them, they broke into a complete charge, sprinting the final 200 yards of the ridge and down into the chateau grounds. 100 men fell in these 200 yards alone of the 350 which crossed them. The remaining 250 men hurriedly cut the wire fence of the chateau grounds and poured in, to see a rabble of German soldiers taken completely by surprise. The Worcesters immediately charged the field, shooting and bayoneting at point-blank range the shocked German units in the chateau gardens. With their adrenaline pumping, they rushed straight to the ends of the field, with the chateau on their left. To their amazement, on that left-hand side, they saw alongside them the survivors of the South Wales borderers, who had stubbornly resisted the Germans all day, finding refuge in the scarred chateau, where they had fought by tooth and nail to resist becoming completely surrounded. As the Worcesters arrived, the borderers were still engaged in a firefight, and had delayed a great many German soldiers from turning their attention towards the men in road. With the Worcesters' momentum having secured the situation, Major Hankey went to find whoever had led the brave 1st Battalion through this ordeal, finding it to be none other than an old friend of his, Colonel H. E. Burleigh Leach. Hankey remarked to him, "My God, fancy meeting you here," to which Leach, wounded, like many of his men, replied, "Thank God you have come." Of the 1,200 German troops in the village, the majority had been drawn to the chateau by the pocket held by the desperately outnumbered South Wales borderers until the Worcesters' attack had sent the majority running. Despite the clear German numerical advantage, it seemed that a lack of leadership as well as experience in the face of such a surprising and aggressive charge as that of the Worcesters had resulted in a general panic, with troops spilling up into the village itself to seek cover in the houses. The newly formed line of the Worcesters, in the cover of a sunken country lane, was taking rifle fire from the village, and Hankey moved combat patrols up into the streets to target German marksmen. The patrols encountered isolated pockets of resistance, and Sergeant Sutton, suspected author of the earlier account, was awarded a Distinguished Conduct Medal for single-handedly eliminating a German machine gun nest. With the new position occupied by the 3 companies being downhill of the village itself, and rendered unsafe until the entire village was secured, A Company moved in from the northwest and began pruning through the village, hunting for hiding groups of German soldiers. There was contained street fighting as both sides continued to bombard the area, with shells setting many houses in the village ablaze. Here the companies remained, in suspense, ready to yet again defend the town from a fresh German onslaught. However, to their joy, no attack reached them. German accounts of the fighting within Gheluvelt are ominously vague. It is suspected that the terrible surprise of the Worcesters' arrival, and the panic which ensued, led the larger German presence to believe that a great many more men had attacked in that fateful hour than had in reality. The Germans were certainly cautious to commit to retaking the town, and despite the ceaseless pressure applied by the presence of the Kaiser, they ultimately decided it best to count their losses and regather their initiative. Captain B.C.S. Clark would describe the scene after the battle as, "Both the Germans and ourselves were in the village, and both artilleries were busy shelling it. Some of the houses went aloft at very frequent intervals, many others were burning merrily. When darkness came, the firework display was worth seeing. It was weird and uncanny. How well I remember standing with the company commander of the right company amongst the tombstones round the church, watching for the Hun at the crossroads, and gazing at the burning houses, wondering, as usual, what next?" As artillery striking the centre of the town made taking the entirety of Gheluvelt impossible for either side, the mobile phase of the early war had effectively ended. From here, General Fitzclarence had reorganised the local British defence, and the Worcesters were ordered out after nightfall, marching solemnly away from the battlefield that would have their division forever remembered in history. Marching, with the blaze of Gheluvelt at their backs, they did not yet know that they had been made famous back at the newly formed British lines for entirely repulsing the German advance. So too had the South Wales borderers, for their heroic resilience in the face of complete encirclement and annihilation. From here, up until the very last stages of the war, the conflict would settle into brutal, terrifying, and infamous trench warfare, permanently and horrifically scarring the hearts and minds of the millions of personnel who would serve there on the Western Front. Ypres and the fields surrounding it would endure 3 more major battles throughout the war, with this small area possibly having experienced over 1 million casualties.
For the 2nd Worcestershire Battalion, much like the battalions around them, the war would be a long and arduous struggle. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission states a recorded number of 1,894 deaths for the battalion over the course of the war. 42 of those would die on the 31st of October 1914, with 35 of those being recorded missing and later recorded as killed in action. Of the 112 wounded on the day, more would succumb to their wounds later on.
Flashing forward to the modern day, the men of the Worcestershire Regiment are remembered at Gheluvelt Park, open to commemorate the sacrifice of many thousands of Worcestershire men in the First World War. An annual remembrance is held on the 31st of October, the anniversary of Gheluvelt, as well as commemoration services on Armistice Day. It serves as a reminder to the people of Worcestershire of the sacrifice, both at Gheluvelt and elsewhere, made by those from our home county. Weeks later, on November 12th, General Fitzclarence would be killed in a failed night trench raid near Polygon Wood, a counterattack against Prussian forces which had flung themselves at British lines the day before in a last-gasp German effort from the Kaiser's army to break through. He led it personally with his beloved 1st Irish Guards, being killed in no man's land by machine gun fire. Major Hankey was severely wounded at Richburg and left command of the 2nd Worcesters, moving to the 3rd Worcesters after recovering in 1915. He went on to command in the famous Battle of Pilkem Ridge and the infamous Battle of Cambrai. He would survive the war and died at home in 1959.